Chapter 13. There are monsters. There really are. I woke up to an odd mixture of noises. On the one hand, there was the rhythmic creak of insects and the cawing of birds, and on the other, the unmistakable sound of somebody being sick. As I opened my eyes, I noticed that it was daytime, and also that it was alarmingly hot. Sitting up, I saw that all of my observations, except for one, could be grouped under an umbrella observation. We were in a jungle, of a rather odd kind. The remaining observation proved simply to be correct. About 5 yards away, discreetly tucked behind a large frondy plant of some kind, Auckland was having a bad time. I stayed where I was and waited for him. No one likes to be the centre of attention while they're throwing up. A few minutes later he made his way over and sat a few feet away. His entire face was now green, apart from the patches of purple around the eyes and the mouth. His eyes were bloodshot as he turned to me and smiled wanly. "I don't suppose you can magic up a pot of coffee or anything, can you?" I just shook my head. You can't do that kind of thing. God knows I've tried. "Did you sleep?" "Oh, yeah," he said. "I slept perfectly well. And then, about half an hour ago, I woke up knowing I was within seconds of exploding. And I've been pretty busy since then, as you've probably heard." "How do you feel now?" "Terrible. Stark, there's a pool of water over there. I used some of the water to wash my face at half-time. I saw my reflection." I nodded. "Yep, good jungle camouflage. What's happening to me?" "You're getting sick." "No, really? Come on, Stark. Give out the information in slightly larger parcels for once." His voice was steady, but he was scared. "Stand up," I said. He stood, and I rose to look more closely at his face. Underneath the discoloration, the skin was actually holding up reasonably well, largely because I'd managed to get him into here before it got too far advanced. It was still getting worse, but at a much lower rate. There were a couple of tiny patches where the skin felt a little infirm, but that was all. Auckland wriggled uncomfortably. "If you weren't here," I said, stepping back from him, "your face would look the same colour as always. You'd simply look as if you'd been ill for a really long time. The colour here doesn't mean anything in itself, it's just a readout, like an energy level indicator." "So, what's actually happening?" "Let's walk," I said. "Stark, I'll explain, but let's walk. We have to go places, remember?" Auckland grudgingly fell in with me as I started to push my way past the nearest vegetation. "Weird jungle," I said. It was. It was like a jungle out of a children's book. Huge picturesque trees with vines strung between them, massive ferns with broad leaves at ground level and yet with a discernible path, patchily lit by shafts of humid, glistening sunlight. Exotic birds cawed and hooted up in the panoply of leaves far above our heads, playing lead to the insect's tidal rhythm section. The truly strange thing was the colours. I plucked a leaf from a nearby fern and looked at it closely. The edges weren't smooth, but slightly jagged. The leaf was made up of small squares of colour picked from a limited palette. From a distance the effect was of gradually shifting shades of green, but close up you could see that the hues were made up of a few distinct greens intermixed with blues and yellows. From what I could see by looking around, I reckoned there were to be about 256 colours available. The path was a mixture of browns with patches of black and a few spots of white, and the quantized squares of colour were clearly visible without even bending down. Everything was the same. The shifting patches of intense blue way up above the trees were made up of dark blue, cyan, and white, and when a cockatoo-like bird swooped across our path a few yards in front, it too was made up of intermixed squares of colour. The squares were the same size, no matter how far away the object was. The grain on the sky was no finer than that on the path. The nearer objects were, in fact, the more subtle the colouring, because the squares were smaller in relation to the size of the object. The whole thing was just like some three-dimensional computer graphic, and yet the leaves were warm and the trunks solid, and the loose dirt stirred under our feet as we threaded our way along the path. Weird. For a while we wandered along the path in silence, content to look around. It didn't take long for the colours to cease to seem strange. The jungle was, after all, realistically hot and sticky, and I'm sure that Auckland had never been in a real jungle anyway. As we progressed, the vegetation became thicker and thicker, pressing in on the path, and the canopy above let shafts of light through less and less frequently. Soon we were pushing our way through dense fronds in a dark green and oppressively humid gloom. There was a chance that it was Auckland's confusion that was making the jungle become more impenetrable, so I decided to talk before things got any worse. "How much do you know about dreams?" I asked him. "Not much," he admitted reluctantly. Actioneers hate admitting that they don't know about something. In the centre, they never do. They just pretend they're an expert and then hurry off and learn as much as possible about it before they get found out. Not really an option here, though. Well, nobody does, actually. Particularly the people who think they do. A long time ago, people thought dreams were visions. Then they thought they were reflections of the subconscious mind churning away beneath the surface. I had to stop there for a while to concentrate on shoving a particularly large frond out of our way. The path didn't look much better once it was cleared, though, and the vegetation above us was now so thick that we were moving through a murky twilight. After a few more yards, we came to a standstill, unable to go on. I turned to face Auckland and saw that the way we'd come was blocked as well. The vegetation had grown over the path. We were stuck, standing and facing each other's sweating faces in about a square yard of space. "Might there not be a clearer path somewhere?" asked Auckland, irritably swatting a small bug that had landed on his face. Although the bug had been made up of tiny squares of blacks and greys, the spot of blood that flowed from it was real. "No. Pay attention." I had to clear Auckland's mind up soon, or we'd have a hell of a job ever getting out of this jungle. To a degree, they were right. Dreams are a reflection, but as you can see, they're also a reality. When you dream, you come here. This is where they happen. Would this place still be here if nobody dreamed? Yes. That's exactly the point, I said, pleased. Dreamland persists. It's the way it is, partly because of the dreams that take place here, but the dreams people have are shaped by the place too. They affect one another. Okay, he said, nodding. With you so far. I glanced behind me and saw that, although the way was still blocked, it seemed to be slightly lighter up ahead. Dreams aren't just in the mind, I continued. They exist, and they're part of you, like memories. They make up much of what you are, whether you remember them or not. Again, you affect one another. Right. So, if something goes wrong with part of your body, if some of the cells get rabid or get screwed up by something, you get ill. And if something goes wrong with your dreams, You get ill too? Give that man a cigar. Stark, something peculiar is happening with all these frondy things. There seems to be a path opening up behind you. I looked, and he was right. It was a pretty ragged path, overgrown and tangled up to chest height, but it was there all the same. You can't actually kill someone straight off in a dream, I said, backing slowly along the path. You can't do anything which will make them die in their sleep. That was another lie, but he wasn't to know, and it was very nearly the truth. Oh, that's a relief. But you can cause them to die. Oh. You can get in amongst their dreams and stir them around and tangle them, pervert them and disease them. The person becomes ill, and eventually they die. And that's what's happening to me. Yep. Who's doing this to me? I mean, who's actually doing it? No one, I said. Oh, come on, Stark. It must be someone. And there can't be many people who can do that kind of thing. The options must be pretty few. That's just it. There's no one left anymore who can do that, apart from me. The other one was killed 8 years ago, and I'm the only one left. This is just a glitch, something random. And then a rare thing happened. I got emotional. I turned back the way we were coming and walked quickly. Now that Alclin was back on the team, comprehension-wise, the path was much easier, although we were passing through an area that was obviously pretty dense at the best of times. I could see what looked like a small clearing up ahead, and I strode towards it. I was unbearably hot, tired, and fed up, and I wanted to sit by myself for a moment. I didn't want to have to explain anything, carry anyone, or think about anything. Especially think about anything. Stark, wait! Alclin called after me, hurrying to try and catch up. The problem with my bad moods is that they're almost over as soon as they arrive. By the time people realise that I'm angry, I'm already out the other side. All my moods these days are like that, even the good ones. I strode on anyway, letting myself calm down a little bit more. I realised that I'd been on a bit of a downer for the last day or so, since the mono ride out of Colour to East Edge. The thing is, you don't know everything. Not even you, Mr. Obviously There Was No Gang. I haven't told you, so you can't know everything. I will do, if it's relevant. I may do anyway, but it's unlikely you'll understand, and it's even less likely that you'll care. How many times have you tried to talk to someone about something that matters to you? Tried to get them to see it the way that you do? And how many of those times have you ended feeling bitter and resenting them for making you feel like your pain doesn't have any real substance at all? It's like when you split up with someone and you try to communicate the way you feel because you need to say the words and need to feel that somebody understands just how pissed off and frightened you feel. The problem is, they never do. Plenty more fish in the sea, they'll say, or you're better off without them, or do you want some more of these potato chips? They never really understand because they haven't been there every day, every hour. They don't know the way that things have been and the way that it's made you, the way that it structured your world. They'll never realise that someone who makes you feel bad may be the person that you need the most in the world. They don't understand the history, the background. They don't know the pillars of memory that hold you up. Ultimately, they just don't know you well enough, and they never can. Everyone's alone in their world, because everybody's life is different. You can send people letters and show them photos, but they can never come to visit where you live. Unless you love them. And then they can burn it down for you. As I sat in the clearing, waiting for Auckland to catch up, I heard a sound in the distance. I couldn't be sure, but it sounded a little like a tiger, and I was glad when the dishevelled actioneer eventually made his way to where I was sitting. He looked as hot as I felt, and regarded me with some caution as he approached. I'm sorry if I said anything to upset you, he said, looking contrite. No, not your fault. You pressed an old button, that's all. How are you feeling? He plonked himself down on the ground next to me. Tired and hot. Do we have to stay in this jungle? Can't we find a nice meadow or something? Possibly, but I don't think we should. The only way to find whatever's given you grief is to follow its trail. This is what you dreamed of in my apartment, and you haven't dreamed since then, have you? No? Then this is the nearest to where it'll be. What are you looking for? Anything? Nothing? I shrugged. Whatever. Stop me if I'm being too precise for you. I understand, he said. Wait and see. I clapped him on the back and stood up. I think you're getting the hang of this. Mid-afternoon found us still tramping through the jungle. Auckland was bearing up pretty well, but I felt completely whacked and doubted that he felt anywhere near as good as that. The actioneer had experimented with not wearing his jacket for a while, but I explained to him that the point about a jungle was that it was hot, and that he would feel the same whatever he was wearing. The fact that he absorbed this immediately seemed to show that he was finally getting a grip on how this whole thing worked. We had broken for lunch at midday. Auckland's parcel from the farmer's wife held more than enough to fill us both up. Apart from the fact that it was solid tramping through, I'll spare you the details. We walked, and then we walked some more, and then after that we walked for a bit. I'm sure you get the general idea. The only mildly different aspect of the walking we were currently doing was that the path was now slightly lower, with gentle banks leading up to the jungle on either side of us. Different, but not exactly exciting. I was beginning to think that the jungle was going to go on forever, featureless and unrelenting, when Auckland pointed in front of us. What's that? At first I thought the answer was, more bloody fronds, what does it look like? But then, on closer inspection, I saw what he was talking about. I went up to the fronds in question and pushed a few of them aside. It's a wall, I said, factually, because it was. Built into the right-hand side of the path was a piece of wall. It was fashioned out of grey blocks of stone and looked very old, like a relic of some Inca civilization. I say grey, although of course the blocks were a speckled mixture of black, grey, blue and white. Oh, so it is, said Auckland, rubbing a grimy hand across his damp forehead. Thank God I've got an experienced guide with me. What can I say? It's a wall. Come on. A little further we found another piece, and looking ahead we could see that the vegetation seemed to be breaking up in the distance, as if the jungle was thinning out. Unless I was much mistaken, the next bit was on the horizon, and I told Auckland so. Oh, good. I'm getting a bit bored with this jungle, he said, swatting at another bug. They seemed to go for him in a big way. Bugs can take or leave me, it seems. The insect kingdom has its stark habit well under control. Auckland was clearly a major attraction, the Dopaz of the bug world. Suddenly, there was a sound, and we both whirled around to stare back the way we came. What was that? I think it was probably a tiger, I replied. The sound came again, sounding about a half-mile off. Yep, it's a tiger. That's, not ideal, is it? No. Interesting, though. Listen. When the tiger roared again, it was unmistakable. It was exactly the same sound each time, like a digitized snatch of noise. That fits, I guess. A digital tiger in a bitmap jungle. Would its digital teeth be a good or a bad thing to have around one's throat? Asked Auckland, peering anxiously in the direction of the sound. Probably bad, and I suggest for once that we don't wait and see. We hurried along the path, and the next time we heard the roar, it sounded a good deal further away. The tiger appeared to be moving in a different direction, which was good. It obviously wasn't tracking us, which meant it didn't know who we were. Auckland was visibly relieved. I didn't break out the champagne or anything, but I felt pretty positively about it too. Within half an hour, the thinning was beginning to happen in the trees around us. There began to be as much sky as vegetation above, and the wall had become an unbroken stretch of grey on the right. The path itself had been on a gradual incline for the last mile or so, slowly heading upwards. Looking back, the jungle seemed to be an enormous basin of colour, a bowl whose lip we were approaching. The trees became fewer still, and suddenly it was as if we were walking in a damp forest rather than jungle. The ground was less covered too, red earth showing through the creepers. There was an outcrop of rock about 50 yards in front of us, seemingly the border at the edge of the jungle, and we headed for that. The last stretch was pretty steep, and by the time we reached the top we were both panting heavily. It was worth it, though. Before us lay a plain which was flat and featureless, apart from a regular sprinkling of shrubs and stunted trees. At the far side, about a mile or so away, a range of grey mountains took up half of the sky. More importantly, there was a building on the plain. Right at the other side, snug up against the mountains, a castle sat on top of a column made entirely out of red brick. The base looked about 20 yards across. A huge pillar that went up about 200 metres before widening massively to support the castle proper. Thinner columns, a couple of metres across, stood at the four corners of the upper portion. From the highest rooftop was flying a white triangular flag. We stood shakily, staring at it and grinning. "Weird building," panted Auckland, "but I love it." It's a good place," I said. "We've looked out again." "Do you know whose it is?" "No, but they'll know me. Come on, let's go." There was a very loud roar from right behind us. "Shit," we said in unison, whirling around. There was nothing there. "Where is it?" "I don't know." Back to back, we slowly turned in a circle, staring into the bushes. "Stark! Shh!" We stopped rotating and listened. Only the faintest crackling of dried leaves told us that the tiger was there in the bushes somewhere. "How did it get here?" Quietly. "Now shush." The tiger roared again, the sound coming from the dense bank of fronds to the left of the path. The jungle was growing up around us again, and quickly. The edge was now 10 yards away, and each time we turned it got thicker and thicker. Another roar, and we both turned to face it, standing side by side. "What are we going to do?" "I don't know. Wait, yes I do. Slowly back towards the edge of the jungle." At first I thought night was beginning to fall, because out of bright sunlight we were once more in an increasingly murky green haze. But looking up, I saw that the sky was obscured with trees and vines again. We backed more and more quickly, but the jungle kept pace, thickening all around us. Although we were making quite a lot of noise as we stepped through the fronds, the rustling from the bushes in front of us was more than loud enough, and the roar, when it came again, was deafening. "Shit," I said. "This isn't working. We might have to go for plan B." "Which is?" "The usual. Running away." "Sounds good to me." We turned as one and started to run. We got 2 yards. Standing rangily in front of us was the biggest tiger I have ever seen. Okay, I've not seen that many, but I know the average proportions, the standard package. This one was not average. This was the Mack truck of the tiger world, an 18-wheeler. Its back was about 5 feet off the ground and its jaws were a foot wide and distressingly full of teeth. Its coat was a vivid mat of orange, black and white stripes. The colours were still digitized, but that didn't feel as comforting as it sounds. This was not a computer graphic. We could hear it breathing. "Oh dear," said Alkland with commendable restraint. The tiger growled, an extraordinary sound that filled the jungle, filled the world. I put my hand on Alkland's arm. At first, I thought he shrugged it off, but then I realized it was just the fact that he was trembling so violently. "Back up," I said quietly, looking at the tiger, trying hard to gauge what it was going to do. Wild animals, especially the horrendously carnivorous kind, are a little unpredictable in their behaviour. They don't circulate agendas. They action things immediately. We took a couple of small, slow, careful steps backwards. The tiger took one rangy pace forward, growling massively again. "Fuck." I don't suppose there's a plan C, is there?" "Not at this time." "Oh, pity." The tiger roared again and took another pace forward. It was now about 3 yards away, a distance it looked more than capable of leaping. I say that because the tiger started to go down on its haunches, its muscles bunching as it prepared to pounce. How far it could leap seemed very relevant at that moment, more relevant than anything else I could think of. Suddenly, Alkland said something. "Here, kitty, kitty." "I'm sorry," I said, turning to stare at him. The actioneer, still trembling, was reaching out one shaking hand towards the tiger, his predominantly green face twitching occasionally with fear. "Here, kitty. Nice kitty." I looked back at the tiger and was stunned to see that it looked as fazed by this development as I was. He was still down, back swaying, ready for action, but his body was tensed in reserve. "Here, kitty, kitty." The tiger stared at us for a moment longer, and then abruptly sat up, front paws neatly in front of him, head on his side, looking at us. "Oh, nice one. What made you think of that?" I asked, impressed. "It just popped into my head," whispered Auckland. "Now what, though?" I took a cautious and microscopically small step forward. The tiger stayed where it was, regarding us curiously. "The problem is," I said, "we want to be on the other side of him, and relaxed though he looks..." I stopped and stared. The tiger wasn't relaxed. It wasn't just still. It was dead. "Oh no," said Auckland. "Oh no." The tiger's eyes were glazed over, unseeing, and its whole body was trembling. The shaking got more and more violent, and then its eyes popped, one immediately after the other, spilling jelly and blood out onto its nose. Red, bleeding flesh started to string out of the sockets as if pulled on invisible hooks, and gashes appeared all over its body, the skin bursting from the pressure inside. "He's coming," wailed Auckland. "It's gonna split." Suddenly, the tiger's pelt burst apart as a tower of solid meat pistoned upwards, trembling and shaking. It stopped when it was 15 feet high, grotesquely large, 100 times too much matter to have been inside the tiger, pulsating and dripping blood, writhing and forming some shape in terrible silence. Night fell instantaneously. Total darkness everywhere except ahead, where the metamorphosis shed a rancid orange glow for yards around. Nothing was digitized anymore, I noticed unhelpfully. This was for real in every way. And then the noise started. "Come on!" I shouted and grabbed Auckland, who was transfixed in horror. I can't. "Yes, you can. Quickly, before it gets any worse." By brute force, I managed to pull his roots out and bundled him around the side of the mound of flesh. A stray tendril of ropey meat flicked out at us as we passed, and the heat and the smell of the thing pushed into my nose like a pencil hammered upwards. Auckland tripped and fell over a shrub in the darkness, and I yanked him back up again. I shoved him in front of me as a noise from the thing behind us began to climb in pitch, a huge, twisting whine. We'd got about 10 yards, stumbling and careering across the plain, when the sound reached a peak and exploded into a roar that made the tigers seem like an effeminate squeak. It made the bones in my head vibrate. Auckland moaned and mumbled incoherently, feet tripping over themselves, body flopping like an unrelated set of parts loosely tied together. He'd gone. The can-do actioneer wasn't there anymore. He'd fled as if he'd never been. Auckland was a child again, a terrified 5-year-old in a 60-year-old's body. I grabbed one of his arms and strung it across my shoulders. Gripping his hand with one of mine and my other arm behind his back, I pulled him onwards as quickly as I could, feeling the muscles in my back strain and pull. The roar came again, and this time, unbelievably, it was louder. It was everything. It was behind us and around us. It was inside us. Bent over with Auckland's weight, I wrenched my head up to look into the distance. In the darkness I could see the castle, bizarrely spotlit from below with yellow points of light high up above the column. It looked like some water tower of architectural significance, an urban sonne lumière. I propelled us towards it as fast as I could. But it was far too slowly, and it was such a long way. There was a flash of light, and the way in front of us was illuminated for about 5 yards in a virulent red glow. A glow which I knew was pouring out of holes in the body of the thing behind us. I couldn't help it. I couldn't help it, mumbled Auckland, with his head lolling, jerking up and down as I ran. I couldn't stop it. He wasn't talking to me. Behind, I could hear the sound of the thing approaching. A horrible noise. Somehow the fact that it was a light rustle when it should have been earth-shaking thuds made it even worse. Dragging Auckland was getting harder and harder. He wasn't participating, just muttering that it wasn't his fault over and over again. It was like carrying a heavy sack of bricks that really didn't want to go with you. Bricks that didn't even know you were there. I didn't see the bush in front of us until it was too late. We tripped straight over it and fell headlong, faces crashing onto the hard, gravelly earth. I leapt to my feet as quickly as I could, feeling blood trickling down my cheek, and I looked behind. You're not going to get it. There's not a hope in hell that I can make you see what I saw. Remember what it was like when you were 5 and you dreamed a bad thing? Remember what made you wake screaming for your mother, and what made you shriek your throat roar until the light in the hallway went on and you heard her feet swish along the corridor towards your door? Remember the way it felt as if your heart would stop, as if your bowels would fail, as if your whole body would just seize and turn into stone, cold stone? It was 30 feet high. It galloped like a horse in sickening slow motion. It had no skin, just twisted red muscles that rubbed against each other, pulling and stretching, breaking and knitting back together. It looked like it had a rider, but it hadn't. There was just a dripping red shape on its back, a shape that writhed and spat, a shape that was the churning remains of everyone who hurt you when you were too young to remember. It was the man in the park and the stepfather and the janitor and the sweating uncle smashed into one and dead, but still moving, growling and writhing, grown insane with death, with a roar that burnt the inside of your head and torched what you'd built to cover the remembrance of that misery. It was a bad thing. I bent and grabbed the back of Alclin's jacket, yanking him to his feet and then pulling him along again, throwing everything I had into a last effort to get away. Bobbing in front of us were the lights of the castle, still impossibly far away, and behind us was the rustling, which wasn't getting louder, although it was getting nearer. I tried to focus on the light ahead and tried to feel it pulling us towards it. I tried to pour myself down that channel and drag Alclin with me, and then it blinked and the castle jumped back 100 yards. As we ran, it blinked again, keeping pace and then gaining on us, jumping further and further back each time until it was getting further away, no matter how fast I scrambled and pulled. The ground was now muddy and deep, my shoes caked in pounds of grey mud. Wrenching my feet up out of the clinging muck got harder and harder, and still the castle lights bounced back further and further until they were a mile away, 2 miles, 100 miles. I steeled myself and glanced back again. The bad thing was getting closer, much closer, and we were getting nowhere. We'd had the same bush to the side of us for 30 seconds now. We weren't moving, no matter how fast I ran, and in the castle 1,000 miles away the lights were going out now. "Alcland!" I screamed into his ear, still dragging him forward. He chunted on, weighing more and more with every step, the purple in his face spreading visibly, cell by cell. I screamed at him and slapped his face as hard as I could. "It wasn't my fault," he shrieked, the words suddenly cutting through his mumbling. "I couldn't help her." "Alcland, we're gonna turn around." "No!" "Yes, we have to. Trust me." "I can't." "You have to. You have to face this, or it will get you." "No!" He was crying, tears streaming down his face. I hated to do this to him, but I knew I had to. "Yes!" I stopped dead in my tracks, pulled his arm off my shoulder and turned around. The rustling grew louder suddenly, a scratching, scraping noise like metal on glass or a zip being pulled down by shaking hands in desperate, trembling haste. I saw the monster again and, barely aware I was doing it, threw up. I tried to turn Alcland, but he was strong in his terror, strong like a rock. The monster roared and blood spurted out of my nose, spattering onto the ground. "Turn, Alcland, damn it!" "Turn!" I screamed at him. Everyone has a special strength in them, a strength they can only find when the alternative is unthinkable. I threw my strength against Auckland and yanked him around, screaming at him to look. But his eyes were screwed tight and his fists pushed deep into the sockets. I lunged behind him and slipped my arms from the back, wrenching his fists away as the monster burnt my face with its closeness and its smell. I closed my eyes and jammed my fingers into Auckland's sockets as hard as I could. "Look at it!" Silence. I opened my eyes. It was gone. In front of me stood Auckland, hands over his face, weeping. I could barely see him because there was no light anymore. The glow had gone with the monster. Auckland shook me off when I reached out to touch his shoulder, so I stepped back a yard and let my head drop, panting. Suddenly, I was aware of how many muscles I'd torn, how drenched in sweat I was, and how much I was trembling, and how much I wanted my mother. I turned and looked at the castle. It was only about 400 yards away now, and the spotlights were still on, sending beams up the brick columns. Letting my head loll back, I stared up into the night sky to where the lights were up above. Auckland was as rigid as a statue, racked with sobs so small and so intense you couldn't see them. There was nothing I could do for him at this moment. Say what you like about smoking. Say that it's bad for you, that it kills people. I know these things. All I can say is sometimes they don't seem very important. If I hadn't been a smoker, that moment would have been a great time to start. And where the hell would I have bought some from? 5 minutes later, the worst of the storm had passed. Auckland still had his back to me, but he was less rigid and looked less as if he was trying to hold himself together by pure force of will. He put his hands on his hips and sagged slightly, head drooping. I lit another cigarette off the remains of the last, wishing that I had some that were about a yard long. There was nothing else I could do. Not yet. You don't go up and put your arm around a guy's shoulder when he's been through something like that, saying, "Hey, never mind." That doesn't cut it. The monsters in Dreamland are personal. I just interpreted what was happening in the best way I could. It didn't mean anything to me, and may not have been related to what Auckland felt either. It was Auckland's monster, and you can never really understand somebody else's pain. When someone's seen something like that, felt their youngest guts stirred around and trampled, they don't want comfort from a stranger. It doesn't mean anything. The mind is like a pool of water, and rain falls as you age. The water gets deeper and looks so still. Occasionally some stray thought or impulse betrays its depths, but seldom. But right down, deep down underneath, right at the bottom, there may be something lying there. Something that died a long time ago, something rotted and foul that belies the pool's still surface. Auckland had just seen a bubble rise from the bottom and had smelt the stench of decay. When that happens, you don't want other people to come too close, in case they smell it too. So, instead, I did my job and wearily dragged my thoughts towards the next bit. There's always a next bit somehow, and I'm always the one thinking about it. On any other day, at any other time, the castle in the middle distance would have looked pretty weird. Today, now, it just looked like a quality place to be. The lower portion shot up perpendicularly for a couple of 100 feet. Although it was made of brick, it looked hundreds, thousands of years old. Sat on top, like a birdhouse, was the castle complex itself, which spread wide over the edges of the central support column, which meant we were going to have to go for one of the 4 much more slender corner posts. They weren't big, but I thought we could probably both make it up one at the same time. The plane was absolutely silent where we stood, with not a sliver of sound falling down from above. But the lights were on, and that meant people were at home. I just hoped they wouldn't give us any grief. We were full up. Additional grief, a complimentary side helping of grief, was not something that we needed at this time. There was a small sound from behind, and I turned slowly. Auckland coughed again, and he turned too. His eyes didn't quite meet mine, and wouldn't for the next half hour or so, and there was a shame he couldn't communicate in the curve of his shoulders. His face, though, actually looked slightly better. That came from facing the monster and would only be temporary. He looked tired. He looked old. After a moment he spoke. "You do know what you're doing, don't you?" I didn't say anything. I always thought that stuff about facing things was just guff, armchair psychology. I didn't say anything again, for a variety of reasons. Anyway, he shrugged. "Thank you." "No problem. Are you ready to go on?" The actioneer twisted his hands together for a moment, and then nearly looked up at me. Couldn't we wake up for a while?" "Afraid not." "Why?" "We just can't. If you come in the way we did, you have to go back out that way too, or somewhere like it." "Can't we just go back the way we've come? I know it's a long way, but I don't know how much more of this I can take in one go." "No. That way isn't there anymore. Things shift. We could come that way because of what we are, who we are, and what we're trying to do. There's no going back in Dreamland." He sighed heavily, and I noticed that his hands were still trembling. "We're going up to the castle." Auckland looked past me at the slender brick pillars. "Are there lifts in those things?" "Nope. We're going to climb." "Stark, you're mad!" Auckland shouted, suddenly hysterical. "If you think I'm going to be able to shin up hundreds of feet of sheer brick, you're out of your bloody mind." He ranted on in this vein for quite some time, getting more and more heated. I let him. People always feel better when they've had a chance to blow off some steam about something that isn't the real problem. I cut him off when he was beginning to repeat himself and his voice had risen to a high squeak. "Shh," I said. "Come with me." An hour later we were 3/4 of the way up one of the supporting pillars. But was everything going well? What do you think? I didn't try to explain to Auckland how we were going to climb. I just got him to walk with me across the plain towards the castle. A minimal amount of moonlight seeped around the almost constant cloud cover above, casting a very dim glow across the plain and its regular sprinkling of ghostly bushes. After the heat of the jungle, it was cold, but we were too close to the castle for it to be freezing. It didn't take us long to get to the base of the columns, although we had to stop halfway for a while to let a dreamer pass by in front of us. "Okay," I said, when we were standing by one of the slim support towers. "It's Trust Stark time again." Auckland just looked at me, an expression of glum pessimism on his face. I knew that the castle hadn't come any too soon. He was right about one thing: he couldn't just keep going indefinitely, not in the state he was in. His face looked as if it had been rendered by an impressionist determined to push the limits of his technique, some final extravaganza before the artist realized he was just being silly and went back to painting properly. "Stark," he said, slowly and patiently. This column is several 100 feet high. I am a lowly human, and as such am forced to work within the confines of the laws of physics. There is no way I can climb this. Watch. I held my hands out to him like a mime artist, showing that I had no pads. I wished I had, actually, but my only set was probably still circulating around Stable's weather system. Then I approached the column and relaxed, putting Alkland's skepticism out of my mind. I reached up and wedged my fingertips into gaps between the bricks, and then transferred my weight to my hands. Then, carefully, I raised one foot off the ground and pushed the tip of my shoe into a crack. Pushing up, I took one hand off and reached up again for a higher handhold. Yes, I did rather think that something like this might be involved, muttered Alkland, which is why I say I can't do it. Ignoring him, I raised my other foot, found a gap for it, and paused. Then I quickly shinned up about 15 feet of the column. It did my heart good to hear the small gasp that came from down below. I turned my head and grinned down at him, and then climbed quickly backwards to the ground. Alkland stared at me as if I'd just become a bowl of fruit. How the hell did you do that? Exactly, Alkland, exactly. I'm strong, but I'm not superhuman. Don't you remember anything about what dreams are like? Haven't you ever been faced with something to climb? Yeah, but... And did you have to kit yourself out with crampons and ropes and all that kind of shit? No. Exactly. This is Dreamland, Alkland. We have to climb because climbing is what this bit is about. It's a atmosphere, a thought, not an activity. It's not like real climbing. Things work differently here. Once you've started, it's almost as if you're crawling along a flat surface, although you do still feel as if you're going upwards. So, I can do that? Yep, if you let yourself. Just accept. He sighed heavily and stepped up to the column. I guided his hands into cracks, and for a moment he stood like that, caught in an upwards dive. Then he raised his right foot and wedged the tip of his shoes into a gap. Tentatively, he tensed the muscles in that leg and hauled his body weight upwards, fingers widening with effort, a tight breath hissing out. Good. Now, find a hold for your other foot. He did, and then hung there, muscles vibrating with effort. Then he tumbled back to the floor to land in an irritable heap. I sighed inwardly. The centre has a lot to answer for. Okay, so most people find it a bit difficult to come to terms with the way things work here, but Alkland was having an exceptionally hard time. No one who thinks memos are important will ever find it easy to fly. Look, let's do it together. It's not gonna work, Stark. Yes, it is. Come on. Making him do exactly what I did, I followed the same pattern as before. When we were both hanging off the column side by side, I turned my head towards him. This is really easy, I said soothingly, looking into his eyes. We're not climbing at all, we're just going somewhere that happens to be upwards. Right. Feel how easy it is, I continued, slowly raising my right foot. He followed suit, and although it was clearly a strain, he managed it. Now the right hand. We reached up, and I felt a flutter at the back of my mind. Not a flicker. As if for a moment we were crawling along a brick road, not climbing up a column. He was getting there. We raised our left feet together, and our left hands, and then for a moment rested, clinging on, and yet not clinging. I think I'm getting the hang of this, the actioneer said with a touch of quiet pride. Good. You ready to go on? He nodded, and up we went. He'd got the hang of it. We were about 2/3 of the way up, over 100 feet above the ground, when I first thought I heard something. It wasn't the echo of distant revelry from above, which we'd been hearing for a few minutes. It was something else. A short, swishing sound. I peered over my shoulder back down at the ground, but could see nothing. Shrugging, I carried on climbing at the same slow pace so that Auckland could keep up. A moment later I heard the same sound again. "What was that?" asked the actioneer fretfully. "I dunno," I said. "Did you hear it too?" "Yeah," he said, peering around. "A swishing sound." We made it a few more yards and then we heard the sound again, twice in quick succession. And then suddenly something slim and wooden ricocheted off the column next to my head. "Bollocks! They're firing arrows at us." "Great," said Auckland wildly. "Super. I mean, we're only clinging onto a brick column 100 feet off the ground. By all means, fire pointy things at us." For a moment he wavered dangerously, and I snapped out a hand and grabbed his shoulder, pushing him back into the column. "Auckland, listen, we're not climbing, remember? You said yourself you couldn't climb this high, and yet look where we are. So we're not climbing. If anything else comes down, just dodge to the side. Don't worry about footholds, just duck out of the way. You won't fall unless you think you will." His strained face shone at me in the faint light, but he nodded faintly. Another arrow swished past us, and I urged him to climb faster. As we got higher up, the arrows became more frequent, and we began to hear the sound of excited voices up above. Then a spear dropped down and would have neatly kebabbed me if I had not looked up to see it coming and quickly scooted round the column. Seeing that it was possible obviously helped Auckland to believe, because he squirmed out of the way of an arrow coming straight for him a moment later. It was undignified, and he teetered for a moment, but he made it. "Ah, nice moving," I said, and he grinned at me in the half-light. Soon afterwards the projectiles began to fall thick and fast, and we both scuttled around the backside of the column. This was fine for another few yards, but then a small trapdoor opened above and things began falling on that side too. We crabbed our way back round to the front side of the column and continued climbing as quickly as we could. Suddenly there was an odd metallic sound from above, and I glanced up to see the lip of a large iron cauldron. "Shit! Auckland, round the back again." We got there just in time to avoid the cascade of boiling oil that shot past us towards the ground. We stayed where we were for a moment, trembling. They don't seem very pleased to see us," observed Auckland shakily. I thought you said this was a good place." "Oh, it is," I said. "They're just taking precautions." Cautiously, I stuck my head around the front of the column. "Hey!" I shouted. "Hey!" "What are you doing?" hissed Auckland. A head wearing a conical iron helmet stuck itself out over the battlements, now about 30 feet above. "Hey!" I called again. "What?" shouted a voice. "What do you want?" "Could you stop firing at us, please? Things are difficult enough as it is." "Oh, that's your problem. You're attacking us. What do you think we're going to do, lay out a red carpet?" An arrow zinged past my cheek. "We're not attacking you. Christ, there's only 2 of us." "It's the principle of the thing." "Look," I shouted in exasperation. "Don't you know who I am?" "Nope," he called. "Should I?" "Shit," I muttered quietly, before going back to shouting. "Is there anyone in command up there?" "Yeah." "Who is it?" "Me." "Oh." I hung my head for a moment, and then motioned Auckland to recommence slowly climbing the column. I climbed too, shouting up as we went. "Is the king there?" I hazarded. "Of course he is. This is a sodden castle." "Could I speak to him?" "Nope. He's in a meeting." An arrow bounced off the column above me and thwacked me sideways across the cheek. Sorry about this, the voice called down, but it's boiling oil time again. Looking up, I saw the black cauldron peeping over the edge. Auckland scuttled back round the other side. No, don't, I called up. Hang on a moment, I've got an idea. This had better be interesting. It is. Look, go to the king and tell him that it's Stark, okay? Tell him what? It's Stark. Sorry, you'll have to speak up. The oil's bubbling right next to me. It's Stark, I shouted. What is? Me! I'm Stark. So? Just tell him, would you? Another spear whistled past. Well, I don't know, said the voice. How do I know that while I'm away you won't turn into a ravening horde of 20,000 barbarians or a pillaging tribe of Mongol warriors? Take it from me, I shouted in a strangled tone of voice. It won't happen. The head disappeared for a moment, and I heard the sound of heated deliberation. By coincidence, both Auckland and I took that moment to glance down at the ground. It was now a very long way down. Then the head reappeared. Okay, the soldier said. This is what we'll do. I'll go and see if I can speak to the king. See what he's got to say. In the meantime, I'm afraid my colleagues will have to keep firing at you just in case. All right. Christ, all right, but hurry, yeah? And can you put the oil on hold? Yeah, okay, but only till I get back. That's my favourite bit. The head disappeared over the rampart. There was a brief pause, and then the barrage of arrows continued. I went round the back of the column where Auckland was clinging on with increasing desperation. We'd better keep climbing. I thought they said they'd know you, Auckland panted, wearily reaching for another hold. Well, they do generally. A shadow fell from the trapdoor above, and we scooted back round the front again, in time to watch a hail of small rocks fall past. Christ. Upwards we went, swinging round and round the column depending on where the most dangerous missiles were coming from. As we got closer to the top, the front became increasingly the safer of the two, because of the way the rampart jutted out over the support and made it difficult for the archers to get a proper angle on us. Unfortunately, there was no way we would be able to negotiate the overhang, and the trapdoor was well guarded. We got closer and closer until we were nestled under the base, nearly as high as we could go. Stray arrows began to zip alarmingly close to us again, fired by soldiers who were hanging right off the rampart, their feet held by other men. The barrage began to intensify as the others started using the tactic, and the stones began to hit their mark more often. Auckland's grip became looser, and I was finding it difficult to hang on myself when I heard a loud grating from above. We were being forced round the column towards the trapdoor, and suddenly I realised what they were going to do. They were going to pour the oil anyway, the bastards. Stark, I'm going to fall, wailed Auckland, and looking at him, I could see that he was right. The grating turned into a scraping as the soldiers slowly tipped the cauldron on its side. I lunged out and grabbed the actioneer just as he was about to fall. Unfortunately, I had to swing around the back of the column to get him, and I looked up to see the enormous black lip of the cauldron tipping further over, and for a moment really thought that finally we'd had it. Then suddenly there was the sound of shouting. The lip edged backwards, and after a moment hands reached down through the trapdoor to haul us up. Stark, greetings. It is beyond my limited, though regal powers of expression to evoke my pleasure at meeting you once more. Yeah, hi, I said, and bowed slightly. The room Auckland and I had been led to by the soldiers, now hushed and deferential, was a huge marbled chamber strung with panels of multicoloured silks. Rows of liveried soldiers and servants lined the corridor we'd been led down, and lines continued into the king's reception. We walked along a deep blue carpet into the centre of the room. The king sat in a large gold throne at the end, flanked on either side by a pair of crowned women wearing white gowns, each holding a large greyhound-like dog on a jewelled leash. One of the women looked rather like Zoe, a woman who lives in my building, but that didn't necessarily mean anything. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. It's not important, or maybe it is. I don't know. If I tried to get my head too tightly around these things, I'd end up out on the streets collecting string and shouting at traffic. Behind them stood noble-looking men, all with twirly moustaches and dressed in tight-fitting silk jackets and voluminous short trousers. The king is a charismatic mid-40s with a tidy brown beard, regarding us in a smiling silence for a moment, and then tapping his cigar ash into an object that appeared to be one of those freestanding ashtrays you find in hotel lobbies. I'd never seen him before, of course, but he knew me. You know the way how in dreams you can be with people whose faces you've never seen before and yet know that they're friends of yours? It works sort of like that. It's actually a little more complex and to do with me, but basically it's like that. "I must apologize," continued the king, "for the vigilance of my soldiers. They assumed that you were scouts of the bastard usurper Quentor, vile bespoiler of purity and scourge, these last 20 years, of the kingdom and its peace. Backed by the evil witch Ilere Dammit, he has grown strong, and my honoured men must at all times be careful, for he has the glamour, and oftentimes changes his shape to appear as a raven or a fair maid. But he shall never win," he concluded convolutedly, voice raised in an imperious bellow. "For we, nobles and stout yeomen alike, shall stand firm in the defence of the memory of my dear mother, the good Queen Twambo, and never, never fall." Everyone, servants, soldiers, and nobles alike, burst into spontaneous twittering applause. Oh, Christ, I thought. What a bunch of drongos. Uncharitable, I know, but I hate these sword and sorcery things. They're like fairy tales made up by computer programmers. Still, I know how to behave, so I bowed more deeply this time, nudging Auckland to follow suit. "Absolutely," I said earnestly. Auckland muttered something too, a broad, zoned smile on his face. I think it was all getting a bit much for him. "What brings you, therefore, once more to our hallowed kingdom, O Stark, lone swordsman of the path of righteousness?" Ignoring Auckland's quiet giggling, I took a pace forward. Well, O King, it's like this. I come not on my own account, but as a guide, an escort for the Lord Fell of Auckland." I gestured towards the actioneer, who bowed again, quaking with suppressed laughter. "His lordship's in a spot of grief at this time, and we are travelling long in search of a solution to his troubles." "I see," said the king sagely. "I perceive indeed that he has the mark of evil on him." This, I assumed, was a reference to Auckland's facial colouring, although who knows, maybe he didn't like his jacket. "Where does the source of this evil lie?" "I fear our quest lies far from here, over the mountains and through the realms of Spangle, probably." "Spangle? Where is that, O warrior?" I pressed on, improvising wildly. "Many, many leagues hence, my liege, miles away, through the corridor of Yopa and the constellation of everlasting sound." Finally, it got too much for Auckland, and a burst of laughter escaped. The king swivelled his gaze towards him. "His lordship finds something amusing?" No, I said quickly. 'Tis but a part of the curse laid upon him. Sometimes such is the evil hex laid upon him by the warlock telephone. He laughs at completely inappropriate times." Alkland got the message and sobered up enough to keep a straight face. The king nodded and turned to me again. "Well, O Stark, if you will accept my counsel, I ordain that you rest here a while. Dragons are abroad this night, and the travel of many miles is upon you." That would be super, actually," I said. "It is agreed, then. At 9 we shall feast, but first I offer up unto you the facilities of our castle. A shower, perhaps, a chance to freshen up." "Perfect." "Good. Oberic will show you to your rooms, and your buff puffs will be there presently. We look forward to conferring with you further. There is much we must speak of." The soldier I had engaged in shouted diplomacy appeared at my side. We bowed towards the king once more before being led back down the carpet and out into the corridor. "Sorry about all the shooting earlier," said Oberic cheerfully as he led us through a bewildering array of high-ceilinged stone rooms and corridors. "You know how it is." What are buff puffs?" asked Alkland, struggling to keep up. "Shower attendants," replied the soldier. "They shower with you to mute the sound of falling water and to stop there being too much space in the cubicle." "Oh," said Alkland, baffled, and I smiled. Buff puffs sounded like a euphemism if I'd ever heard one. The king's hospitality obviously extended beyond that of most hosts. Then, for a moment, I felt slightly odd. Nothing major, just a tiny strange feeling, as if I'd forgotten something. It passed. We were shown into a large bare room. The stone walls had been covered with light brown tiles. A table stood to one side, upon which was laid a wide variety of fruit and canapes. Oberic left, telling us to wait, and Alkland immediately made a lunge for the food. He'd stuffed several of the canapes into his mouth before he noticed what I'd seen immediately. His hands were now changing colour too. "Let me look," I said, and he held them out to me. "It's not too bad," I told him after a close inspection. "The colouring on the backs, but the palms are still healthy. It's the palms that matter." "It's not good though, is it?" "No." The back of my mind was itching, tickling. Something was happening, though I couldn't tell what. "What are we doing here?" Unbeknownst to him, the actioneer's hand had crept back to the snacks, and he looked surprised to find another canapé in front of his mouth. He continued with his mouth full. "I mean, is this near my stream or whatever? Or what? And don't say wait and see." "We're resting," I said. "You have to... or..." I forgot what I was going to say next. "Or..." Shaking my head vigorously, I tried to remember what I'd forgotten, because some other thought was trying to push its way up. What the hell was it? "Stark, are you all right?" "I'm fine. You have to... or..." Suddenly the block faded and I remembered what I was saying. "You have to rest, or you get strained. It's like when you go without sleep back home. For a while it's okay, and then you get very tired, and eventually you'll start hallucinating. It's the same here, even more so because you can't dream." "And, this is a 5-star version of the homely kitchen we saw last night?" "Sort of, but more than that. We should be safe here as well. Nerds though they are, these people are on the right side." "And what side is that?" "The side of whoever gets here first, and that's us." "That," said Alkland with feeling, "qualifies as good news. Tomorrow we'll find your stream. You'll be stronger there, and we can have a crack at diffusing your something together. For the moment, it's a timeout." Someone pushed aside the thick velvet curtain that served as a door, and 2 women entered the room. "Good evening, sires," they said in unison, smiling. Alkland and I stared at them. Both women were identical, with beautiful pert faces and immaculately bobbed honey-blonde hair. They reminded me slightly of a teacher I had when I was about 7, for whom I'd nurtured a bit of a crush. Miss Taylor, that was her name. The memory was complex, warm with the feeling of childish infatuation, but streaked with embarrassment. One of my classmates left a note on her desk on Valentine's Day signed with my name and saying that I loved her. These ladies had eyes that were large and bright, smiles white with perfect teeth, and both were clad only in luxurious brown toweling bathrobes. Hi, I said. Sorry, are we in your room?" "Oh no," they laughed, again in unison. "We're your buff puffs." Suddenly, I realized that buff puff wasn't a euphemism. These women really did come into your shower just to mute the sound of falling water and prevent there being too much space, whatever that meant. Weird way to earn a living. Right, I said, slightly bewildered. Shower time it is, I guess." "Stark," Alkland muttered quietly. Are these people really coming in our showers with us?" Yeah, I think they probably are." "Oh, I see." What was that? It's there again. Whatever is pulling at me. Christ, wish I could work out what it was. There's something I've got to do, something I need to find. The 2 women slipped off their bathrobes simultaneously. Both had identical bodies, perfect, white, and very, very clean. They knelt down and started to chatter amongst themselves, waiting for us to get ready for our showers. "Oh, shit!" I said suddenly. "Shit!" "What?" Alkland said, startled. "I've forgotten something," I said hurriedly, grabbing my coat. "What?" "I don't know. I've just forgotten something. I've left something behind." "Stark, what are you talking about?" I've got to go back. I've got to go back now." "Where? Go back where, Stark?" "Wherever I left it. Look," I said urgently, "I've got to go. You have your shower. I'll be back in time for dinner." "Where are you going?" "I don't know. I've just got to go. I'll be back." I ran to the door, leaving Alkland's staring face behind me. I threw aside the curtain and pelted into the corridor. I ran down the wide stone walkways, passing gaggles of nobles. Servants hurried around, crossing my path, walking the other way, carrying trays of food and baskets of flowers. I dodged them and ran as quickly as I could to the main door. The guttering torches on the walls turned into streaks of yellow light. The huge wooden doors were slightly ajar, and I slipped out. No one tried to stop me, or even seemed to see me as I made my way across the main courtyard. The battlements were strangely deserted, and I vaulted up onto them at one of the corners. Then I remembered the trapdoors, climbed back down and opened one of them instead. Before I lowered myself through, I looked down. It was a long way, but I had to go. I had to go back and find what I'd left behind. I'd be back for dinner, though, I was sure of it. I dangled my legs through the hole, feeling with my toes for a foothold on the column, found one and slid quickly down until my shoulders were through, scrabbling for handholds. Then I was clinging to the column, scuttling down as quickly as I could. I had to go. I had to go back. I had to find it. And once I'd found it, I could come back again. I'd find it and come back, and be back in time for dinner. I'd hardly be gone at all. I'd be back in time for dinner. The column was much taller than it had been before, and it wasn't going down to the plane we'd crossed anymore. It just kept going down, and I wondered desperately where it stopped, because I had to get to the bottom and find my way back to wherever it was I'd left whatever I'd left behind. I had to find it and bring it back. My hand started to slip, and before I'd noticed, I was hanging on only by my feet. My weight toppled gently backwards, pulled by mild gravity. I waved my arms, trying to regain my balance. I'll hardly be gone at all. I'll be back in time for dinner. I fell away from the column and felt myself tumbling downwards, falling quicker and quicker, falling down towards the bottom, and all that mattered was that I had to find it, and I had to be back in time for dinner. And I fell, and fell, and fell, and just as I thought I must surely hit the bottom soon, I came to with a massive jolt to find myself sitting bolt upright on the sofa in my apartment in Colour neighbourhood.